The sorting ceremony at Hogwarts is one of the most iconic moments in a first year's life at the school, and the sorting hat itself is an integral part of the Harry Potter series as a whole. But if you have read the books, you'll know that the sorting hat, as well as the ceremony and Harry's first arrival at Hogwarts, is entirely different in the movie than what we get in the books. Everything from the sorting hat song to the introduction of key characters like the ghosts and Peeves are omitted from the film completely. But these elements help build out the world, and more specifically Hogwarts, which is the central location of the series. So today I wanted to take a look at each change made to this special moment in Harry's journey and analyze why these crucial moments were left out. My name is Gibby and welcome back to episode 6 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. This is the series where I take you through the Wizarding world movie by movie, scene by scene, and compare it to J.K. Rowling's original text. Today we are finally getting into Harry's arrival at Hogwarts and the sorting ceremony. There are over a dozen changes in this scene, which include crucial bits of world building and character development that sadly got cut from the movie. So buckle up, as today we dive into every change between this scene and its corresponding chapter in the book. As always, I'll cover the changes across 4 categories, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. And before we get to the changes, we of course need to refresh our memory on what happens in this scene of the movie. So let's pick up from where we left off last week, with Ron and Harry stepping off the Hogwarts Express. Hagrid collects the first year students and they get into boats which take them across the lake to Hogwarts. We then see them heading up some stairs and getting stopped at the top by Professor McGonagall, who leaves them for a moment before retrieving them for the sorting ceremony. A boy near Harry takes this opportunity to stand up and introduce himself. He offers his hand in friendship to Harry, but only after insulting Ron, which rubs Harry the wrong way and he declines Draco's offer. McGonagall shows back up at this moment and leads the first years into the Great Hall. We then hear Hermione telling one of the other students that the ceiling is bewitched to look like the sky, which she learned in the book Hogwarts: A History. Dumbledore gets up and gives a couple start of term notices about the Dark Forest and a corridor that's off limits. The students then go to the front of the hall, and while everyone's watching, they proceed with getting sorted. Hermione gets into Gryffindor, Draco into Slytherin, and so on. After Draco gets sorted, Ron mutters to Harry that there's not a witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin. Eventually, Ron gets into Gryffindor as well, and then Harry has his turn. Although the sorting hat believes Harry would be good in Slytherin, Harry advocates for himself to go into Gryffindor, as he knows that Slytherin isn't all that great, and frankly, he would like to be with Ron. Eventually, the hat agrees to put him in Gryffindor, and the whole house table erupts with joy. And then they have their feast. We briefly see the ghosts flying around and get introduced to Sir Nicholas, and we overhear Seamus Finnegan telling those around him about how he's half muggle, half wizard. Harry then asks Percy who the professor sitting next to Quirrell is, and Percy tells him that it's Snape, who teaches potions, but he's been after the dark arts job for years. Harry was curious because it seems like Snape has been staring at him while conversing with Quirrell. Plus, Harry's scar hurt for the first time while Snape was looking at him. A plot point that is important to remember for the rest of the movies and series. Finally, after the feast ends, Percy leads the first years to the Gryffindor common room and dorms, and Harry sits by his bed looking out the window, and seemingly thinking about how his life has changed so much over the last month. And this is where the scene fades away. So although this is only just a few minutes in the movie, the corresponding chapter in the book packs a lot bigger of a punch in terms of lore and world building. Before we jump into character changes, I just want to remind you that I can't get into every single bit of dialogue in this video, so if you want to read along with me and dive back into the Wizarding world in a whole new way, use my link in the description to get a free trial of Audible. This will get you 1 free audiobook, so I'd encourage you to grab a copy of The Philosopher's Stone for free on Audible and follow along with me each week. Plus, it supports the channel at the same time, so it's a win-win. Alright, on to the changes. First, let's look at which characters we see and which ones are missing. As for the characters included, there are too many to name off individually, but just to summarize, we've got the Golden Trio, their classmates that we see throughout the rest of the series, the professors of Hogwarts, and the ghosts. As for characters not included, there's actually only one, and that is Peeves. This is crazy because Peeves is almost a main character throughout Harry's time at Hogwarts. The amount of times he plays a role in the actual plot is insane, so removing him from the films is a bit crazy. Personally, I think they just didn't want to handle the special effects involved with creating this character and consistently having him in shots, but it was probably also just a time constraint as well. Before we leave the character section, I do want to mention that some of the descriptions of characters are not accurate, specifically with the ghosts. For example, the Bloody Baron is nothing like what is shown in the movie. They almost show him as a silly character flying around, but in the book he is very serious and a scary ghost who is covered in blood. Plus, he's the only one that Peeves is afraid of and listens to. so some of their portrayal of these ghosts doesn't really line up with the book. I guess this goes back to the whole thing about it being a kids movie to start, and maybe they didn't want to go too far down the scary path in the beginning. Of course, as the series progresses, they don't shy away from this, but in the beginning, they definitely made things more silly or goofy. Another small change is that Percy Weasley actually wears glasses in the book, but in the movie he never does. Now, as for the timeline changes, it's an easy one this week because there are none, so that gets a pass. But our location category does have a few small differences. First, Hagrid takes the first years to the front door of the castle, and after knocking, McGonagall lets them in and takes them from there. In the movie, we just see them walking through the castle before coming upon McGonagall on some stairs. Next, McGonagall takes them to a chamber beside the Great Hall before they get sorted. We'll cover what happens in this room during our plot changes, but this is omitted from the film. So now that we've gone over our character, timeline, and location changes, let's dive into the many plot changes between this scene and its corresponding chapter in the book. Again, I can't go over every single line of dialogue, but if there's a noticeable change, I'll try my best to point it out. Most of today will be covering moments from the book that are completely removed from the movie. So let's start off with change number 1, which is Trevor the Toad. In the movie, Trevor is found on the steps of Hogwarts in front of McGonagall, but in the book, Hagrid actually spots Trevor on one of the boats that the first years take to the castle, and gives him back to Neville. Next, as I just mentioned in the location changes, Hagrid actually takes them to the door of Hogwarts and knocks, and McGonagall opens to take them inside. In the movie, I'm not really sure how any of them would have known where to go because Hagrid isn't with them and they just somehow know exactly which hallways and staircases to take to get to where McGonagall is, even though none of the first years have ever been to the castle before. But anyway, after McGonagall takes them inside, she leads them to an offset chamber next to the Great Hall and leaves them there. While waiting for McGonagall to come back to get them for the sorting, Harry and the rest of the first years are nervous as they don't know how they'll be sorted. Ron says that Fred and George told him it would be painful, but he thinks that they were joking. Hermione is behind them rattling off all the spells she knows to a nearby student, and Harry is nervous as he doesn't know any spells at all and doesn't know if the sorting ceremony is a test in front of the whole school. In the movie, we get none of this preamble before they go into the hall. Another change before they head in for the sorting is when Draco meets Harry. If you've been watching this series so far, you'll know that Harry has actually met Draco twice before this point. First, anonymously in Madame Malkin's while getting school robes, and the second time was on the Hogwarts Express. The moment of Draco offering his hand in friendship to Harry in this scene is pretty much copied from what happens on the train. The only difference is that, as I mentioned last week, they end up getting into a fight and Scabbers saves the day. If you want to know more about that situation, go back and watch last week's episode. Finally, before heading into the Great Hall for the ceremony, we have the first real moment of the students seeing the ghosts of Hogwarts, which is changed for the film. While they are waiting in the chamber, all the ghosts stream in through the walls and are mid-conversation. Harry is obviously freaked out by this and overhears the Fat Friar telling one of the other ghosts that they should, quote, give him a second chance. The other ghost replies that Peeves, who must be the him the Fat Friar was speaking of, gives them all a bad name and he isn't even a ghost. Of course, we know who Peeves is, but the movies completely omit him. In the books, this is a funny little foreshadowing for Peeves' antics that Harry will witness and be a victim of throughout the rest of the series. Alright, so now we are to the sorting ceremony. First, we have probably the biggest change from the books and the change that got Potterheads upset all across the world, which is the Sorting Hat's song. You see, at the beginning of each school year before the Sorting Hat writes and sings a song that pertains to that year. We will experience more dismal songs later on in the series, but this year we get a pretty generic one in which the hat describes each of the 4 houses and what personalities tend to get sorted with each house. I really wish they would have included this as it gives the Sorting Hat much more personality and sets the tone for the year, especially later on, which I'm excited to talk about in future episodes. Anyways, the next change is that in the book, the students are the ones who place the hat on their heads, whereas in the movie, McGonagall makes a point to say that she will place the hat on their heads. It's a small change, but a rather unnecessary one. Like, the book is very clear about this detail, but they do the opposite for the movie, and I'm not really sure why. Next, another small change is that McGonagall goes through the students in alphabetical order, but in the movie, it seems pretty random. Also, a funny side note is that when Neville gets sorted, he jumps off the stool with the sorting hat still on and runs to the Gryffindor table, and then embarrassingly has to get back up and take the hat back to McGonagall. Next, after the sorting, Dumbledore doesn't give his rules before the feast. In the book, these notices happen after they finished eating dessert. For some context, Dumbledore welcomes the students with a few words, which are nitwit, blubber, oddment, and tweak. Then he says thank you and sits down. Harry asks Percy if he's mad, and Percy replies that Dumbledore is a genius genius and the best wizard in the world, albeit a bit mad. It's then after dessert that Dumbledore gives the rules about the forest and the off-limits corridor. Next, while eating, Seamus is the one who asks Nick how he is nearly headless, not Hermione. We also learn from nearly headless Nick that Gryffindor has gone a long time without winning the House Cup. This gives us a little context for the antics that the trio gets into over the course of the school year, as the House Cup is one of the primary goals. In the book, Nick says that Slytherin has won 6 years straight and that the Bloody Baron has become nearly unbearable about it. Harry looks over at the Slytherin table and sees the ghost, and then they ask Nick how he got bloody, and Nick says that he's never bothered to ask. The next change is that the movie removes some context about Neville and his family, which is a common theme throughout all of the movies. While they're eating desserts, the students discuss their parents. Neville says that he was raised by his gran and that his family thought he wasn't magic for the longest time. His uncle would try to catch him off guard and force some magic out of him. Finally, when Neville was 8, his uncle was holding him outside of a window and then accidentally dropped him, and Neville finally used some magic to save himself. His family was so pleased, and then even more pleased when Neville got his letter from Hogwarts, as Neville says that his gran and family thought he might not be magic enough to come. This is the beginning of Neville's long character arc in the series, as the movies cut out a lot of this crucial character. But in the book, we learn a lot more about Neville and his family, and of course, his involvement in the prophecy. But let's get back to today's scene, because all of that will come way in the future. Next, the movie removes yet another song, which is the Hogwarts theme song. Before they leave the feast, Dumbledore has them sing this anthem. Of course, Dumbledore being Dumbledore has everyone pick their own style and tune of singing the lyrics. So while everyone else finishes, the Weasley twins continue singing in a slow funeral march style, and Dumbledore waits for them to finish. Another moment that is omitted from the film is that while they're heading to the Gryffindor common room, the students are taunted by Peeves, and Percy Weasley gets him to go away by threatening to get the Bloody Baron. We aren't told why Peeves is afraid of the Baron, but this will be another recurring theme throughout the books, as Peeves is warded off by this threat to get the Baron time and time again. Finally, the last change is that Harry doesn't stay up after getting to their dorms. He is so tired that he falls asleep almost immediately. Then we get to learn a little bit about a dream he has. In his dream, he was wearing Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him and telling him to transfer to Slytherin. Then he sees Malfoy laughing, and Malfoy then turns into Snape. This is another example of Harry's prophetic dreams, but it is almost easing us into them, as some of these moments are just regular dream things, not visions of Voldemort. But obviously, in regards to the talking turban, Harry is starting to see inside Voldemort's mind and doings. And as you know, this is a recurring theme throughout the entire series. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you think these changes were warranted for the movie. As always, be sure to go back and watch any episodes that you might have missed, and subscribe to stay tuned for new episodes coming out every Sunday. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.